Depending on when you learned to cave dive and from whom, you may have been taught that a primary tie-off needs to be in the open water basin, not at the cave entrance, not just inside the entrance. Now, the logic behind that goes something like this. Let's say you enter a cave in crystal clear, beautiful conditions, and while you're in the cave, somehow the visibility of the entrance just goes straight to hell. Well, you come back, and at the entrance you can't see anything. It's like, what do you do now? Well, according to the theory, all you should have to do is follow your guideline to its end, and then all you need to do to get to the surface is just go straight up. That sounds pretty reasonable, except that it's not. The problem with trying to ascend in zero visibility has to do with orientation, and we can learn a lesson from aviation here. You might remember that JFK's son, John Jr., died in a horrible crash because he didn't believe what his instruments were telling him. He trusted his gut and managed to fly his aircraft right straight into the Long Island Sound. Well, he was not alone. There have been several incidents involving commercial airline pilots where they've chosen to ignore their instruments, ended up falling out of the sky or just diving right straight into the ground. Well, the same thing can happen to us. And unless you've been in zero visibility with nothing to hang on to, you may not believe this, but trust me, I've been there. Without a physical or a visible reference, you really don't know which way is up, which means you may think you're going up, only to discover you're trapped under an overhanging ledge or a log, or worse. You may think you're going up, and you may be swimming back into the cave. Only this time, you don't have a guideline to help you get out again. So here's the deal. If the visibility at the start of the dive is bad, or there's a possibility that it may become bad while you're in the cave, the only way that you can guarantee that you can make it back to the surface is to tie off at the surface. But now let's look at the flip side. What happens when there is no possibility of the visibility going bad while you're in the cave? Now, I outlined this in detail in the accompanying article, but at this point, when we're talking about our most popular North Central Florida cave sites, in other words, Madison Blue, Peacock, Orange Grove, Cow, Little River, Devil's Eye and Ear, and Manatee, the visibility at the entrance is not going to go bad without warning. You're going to have some kind of indication that something's about to happen. Now, it might be a situation like we have at Peacock and Orange Grove, where we get a summertime algae bloom. That can take a week or more to form. It may be like Little River, where for several days before the cave actually begins siphoning, there's a layer of tannic water overhead. It might be like Madison Blue, where the basin can be clear, but you can look at the Withlacoochee River and you can see the water level rising. And if it's about to come even with the level of the water in the basin, you know that it could go dark at any second. So again, this isn't going to come as a surprise. All right, so if the visibility is good and all the indicators it's going to stay good, do you really need to tie off in open water? Well, there's no reason not to if there are no apparent downsides, but here's the case. There very often are some very real problems, starting with the fact there may not be any really good, safe, or reliable tie-offs in open water. At one time, almost all of our sites had numerous rock formations you could tie off in the open water basin, but now some 40 plus years later, in most instances, they're pretty well worn away. It's very possible you'll find better, safer, more secure tie-offs either at the entrance or just inside the entrance. The other thing that you have to think about is, will your guideline cause or pose a potential risk to other people? Now, we're not talking about fellow cave divers. We hope they know how to not get entangled in a guideline. But think about places such as Little River, Devil's Eye, where you're going to have a lot of non-cave divers there in the form of swimmers and snorkelers, free divers, even open water divers, and even open water diving students. Let's think about Little River. Let's say you insist on tying off in the basin instead of to the stake. And some of those little kids playing around there, they get entangled with your guideline and nobody sees it in time, and one of them drowns. Who do you think is going to be held responsible? Think about a class of students at Devil's Eye. Their instructor brings them to the bottom of the basin to do skills, and now they're right on top of your guideline. They may cause your guideline to come undone. They may get entangled to it. Now, another thing, and Devil's Eye is a perfect example of this, think of the surge in free divers that we've seen at these sites. Now, some people, some open water divers, some free divers, they're going to go in a cave regardless, no matter what we do. But there's also a certain number who might not be tempted to go in the cave, except now they see this guideline. It's very visible, very apparent, and they're wondering, hey, wonder where this goes. And this is one of the reasons why there's a stake at Little River, and why that stake is hidden behind a boulder, so that our guidelines won't form a temptation to others. So, again, before you just blindly go and tie off in open water, there's some questions you need to ask. Number one, is there a very real possibility that the visibility will go bad while you're in the cave, or is it already bad? In that case, as we said, you don't want to tie off at the bottom of the basin. If you want to get back to the surface, you need to tie off at the surface. And when that's not a problem, when the visibility is good and you know it's going to stay good, you have to ask yourself, are there safe, secure tie-offs in open water? There may not be. Is your guideline going to pose a risk of entanglement to non-divers? The other thing you need to think about is your guideline going to entice snorkelers, free divers, open water divers into bad behavior, which you don't. So yeah, we know you may have been told that you always need to tie off in open water, but let's think about this. And that's it, you need to think. So dive carefully, be safe, and use good judgment, okay?